want to start this episode with a small confession. Earlier this week, I sat down to work with an AI model on what should have been a fairly straightforward task. I gave it context. It produced an answer that looked really confident and was just so wrong. I corrected it. The next answer, well, was better, but it was still wrong. I corrected it again. By the fourth round, I had given the model more context than I would have given a competent junior teammate. And the result, well, it was acceptable rather than the quality that I was after. That experience is not unusual. It is the texture of using these tools honestly. And it is almost completely missing from the conversations that we're having about AI agents and systems. That is what this episode is about. The gap between what the technology actually does in the hands of individuals and organizations and what the language around it suggests it does. I want to call that gap something specific. I'm calling it the readiness illusion. And I want to spend the next half hour or so walking through what it is, why it matters, and what the research actually says, as well as what serious adoption of AI agents looks like when we stop confusing announcement with arrival. I'm Kevin Novak, CEO of 2040 Digital, professor at the University of Maryland, and author of the book, The Truth About Transformation, Leading in the Age of AI, Uncertainty, and Human Complexity, along with the Ideas and Innovations weekly newsletter. Welcome to the Human Factor Podcast, the show that explores the intersection of humanity, technology, and transformation, along with the psychology behind transformation success. This is season 2. A few weeks ago, HubSpot published their vision for an open ecosystem for the AI agent era. It's a serious piece of corporate strategy, and I think it deserves to be taken very seriously. The framing they offer is that agents should be able to run on HubSpot, meaning any agent can plug into HubSpot's data and capabilities, and that agents should be able to run HubSpot, meaning agents can operate the platform end-to-end through APIs, MCP servers, and CLI, which for the non-technical audience are communication and connection protocols. The remote MCP server is now generally available with read access to campaigns, landing pages, website pages, blog posts, and write access to the core CRM objects. Well, IDC has placed a $36 billion estimate on this agent-driven shift inside their ecosystem. That's a real announcement. It signals real capability and real strategy. And well, the same week it was published, I was on my 4th round of corrections with a model that should have produced acceptable output on the 1st. I want you to sit with that contrast for a moment, because it is the contrast at the center of this episode. The infrastructure for agent-driven work is being built quickly and very credibly. The actual readiness of the technology and the readiness of humans expected to govern it is not where the language suggests it should be. Both of those statements are true at the same time. Holding them both is hard. The loudest voices of the moment don't want us to hold them both. They want us to choose between enthusiasm and skepticism. I just don't think the choice is between those two things. What I do think is that the choice is between honesty and convenience. And to be clear before I go further, this isn't pessimism. By nature, I'm an optimistic person. What follows is a clear-eyed read of the evidence so far to date. Let me name the pattern because naming it makes it easier to think about. The readiness illusion is the assumption, encouraged by vendor stories and amplified by professional anxiety, that capability and readiness are the same thing. They aren't. A system that can do something in a controlled demonstration is not the same as a system that should do something in a real environment, on real customer data with real consequences. The distance between those two states is filled with trust, governance, judgment, error recovery, accountability, and the slow and expensive work of building the human and organizational capacity to know what to hand off, what to check, and what to keep close. We're confusing capability with readiness. And the cost of that confusion is going to land on the people inside organizations who are being asked to absorb a class of tools that act, not just tools that suggest. Well, the conditions for absorbing them, are still being built. Before I go further, I want to ground this in some evidence because I don't want to make any claims I can't defend here. Here's what the research has been telling us. MIT's initiative reported in 2025 that approximately 95% of generative AI pilots inside enterprises had not yet produced measurable returns at the time of the study. Gartner has forecasted through 2025 that at least 30% of generative AI projects would be abandoned after a proof of concept by the end of 2025. And the cited reasons are poor data quality, escalating cost, unclear business value, and inadequate risk controls. McKinsey's State of AI reporting has consistently found that organizations capturing meaningful value from AI are the ones that redesign their workflows around it. And the workflow redesign is overwhelmingly a human factor problem rather than a technical one. Apple published a paper in June 2025 examining the limits of large reasoning models. And what they found was that even systems explicitly designed for complex thought and reasoning collapse on problems above a certain level of complexity. And they often sound more confident as their accuracy drops. Anthropic, the company building one of the most capable models on the market, has published its own work on how to test what AI is actually doing and on the tendency of models to agree with users or to make subtle errors with strong conviction. The people building these systems don't consider the trust questions resolved. That is not the picture of a technology ready to operate on its own on work that actually matters. It is the picture of a technology that is genuinely capable in narrow situations where the request is clear, the guidance is good, and there is human oversight, and that performs unevenly when those conditions aren't in place. If you have used these tools as a practitioner rather than describing them as a presenter, none of that should surprise you. And yet, the loudest voices of the moment are making a completely different claim. Some want to ride the wave. Some want to be the voice in the crowd telling us where we are heading. Their motives are often more about achieving notoriety and being seen as an early adopter and thought leader than about helping the rest of us understand what is actually happening. The problem is not that they're wrong about the direction. The problem is that the way they are speaking suggests we're already there, and we simply aren't. The technology isn't. The humans tasked with adopting it, governing it, and answering for its outputs aren't. The organizations that employ those humans aren't. I want to talk for a minute about the texture of using these tools, because if I don't, well, the rest of this conversation will sound too abstract. Let me describe what I actually experience. When I work with a model, the quality of the output is highly sensitive to the construction of my prompt. That is sometimes treated as a user error. I want to challenge that framing. If a tool's effectiveness depends on the user mastering a skill that has only existed in any discipline form for 2 or 3 years, the tool's not ready to be characterized as autonomous. It is collaborative. And the more we describe it as autonomous, the less we invest in helping users develop the collaborative skills that actually unlock its value. When I get an output, My next step is almost always to evaluate it. The evaluation finds errors. Sometimes those errors are factual. Sometimes they are logical. Sometimes the model has done what I asked, but not what I meant. Sometimes the model has missed nuances that I made the assumption that it would catch. And when I name the nuances explicitly, it produces a much better answer the second, third, or fourth time. The pattern I see is that the model doesn't engage in what a human would call deep thinking. It does not sit with the ambiguity of a request. It does not ask the clarifying questions that a competent colleague would ask, although I often wish it would. It produces something. I correct. It produces something better. I correct again. Across enough rounds, we arrive somewhere useful. The total time invested, well, it's real. The marketing materials never include that time in their efficiency claims. I want to say this carefully because I'm not trying to overstate the case. These tools are powerful. They produce work I could not produce alone in the same time. They expand what is possible for an individual and a small team. The point here isn't that they're useless. The point is that the work they produce requires substantial human supervision, correction, and judgment to become trustworthy. And the path toward genuine autonomy is longer than the loudest voices suggest. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling you something or has not used the tools enough to know. The word trust is doing a lot of heavy lifting right now in vendor materials. And I want to frame where I think the trust question actually lives, because the way it is being used doesn't match the way it functions inside organizations. Trust in this context is not primarily a question about whether the model is accurate enough. Accuracy is necessary, and it isn't sufficient. Trust in an organizational context is built through three things the model can't supply on its own. The first is shared accountability. When the agent acts and the action is wrong, who is responsible? Not in policy, in practice. Whose name is on the consequence? Most organizations have not answered this clearly, and the absence of an answer creates a kind of accountability vacuum where everyone assumes someone else is supervising and no one actually is. The second is the ability to explain. After the agent acts, can a human explain why it did what it did in terms specific enough to audit, learn from, and correct? Well, we're seeing this play out in the workplace where users share work created by AI, but can't speak in any depth about the reasoning or the substance behind the output. If the answer is no, then the organization can't improve. It can only react to outcomes after the fact. That's a thin foundation on which to build autonomous operations. The third is recovery. When the agents get it wrong and at a scale, well, they will. Can the organization undo, contain, or correct the consequences without producing damage that exceeds the value of the actions that worked? Very few organizations have done the operational planning here. Most have governance documents that describe recovery in the abstract, but have never tested it in practice. So if you don't have shared accountability, the ability to explain and recover, you don't have trust. You have hope. And hope's not a change, adoption, or transformation strategy. There is even a more uncomfortable version of the trust question that the data forces us to name. We're not only asking whether to trust the agent, we are asking whether to trust ourselves to know when to trust the agent. And humans are, on average, not very good at that. There is a substantial body of research on automation bias going back to Moser and Skitka in the 1990s. The pattern is consistent. Humans tend to overtrust automated outputs, especially under time pressure, and to undercheck the output even when they had been told to. The more competent the system appears, the worse the checking becomes. This has been replicated in aviation, in clinical decision support, and now in the software context. It isn't a character flaw. It's a feature of how human cognition interacts with apparently and perceptionally competent automation. That has profound implications for how organizations deploy agents. If you put a confident sounding agent in front of a busy professional, the professional will, on average, accept its output more readily than they should. If you don't design the surrounding human work to make verification natural and rewarded, you're going to get less verification than your policy and governance documents assume. The tolling decision is, again, also a human design decision. They can't be separated. This is where the work we do at 2040 Digital and the research behind my human factor method connect directly to this moment. Most of the agent era conversation treats deployment as a tooling decision. It isn't. It is a redesign of who decides what, who is accountable for what, how people see their own role, and how the organization remembers what it has learned. When an agent drafts the email, the question is not whether the email is good. The question is what role the human now plays in that act of communication and how the organization knows whether that role is being performed well. When an agent updates a deal funnel stage in the CRM, the question is not whether the update is correct. The question is how the salesperson's professional judgment is now being formed, exercised, and developed, and what that means for the organization's ability to learn over time. These are not new questions invented for AI. They are the same questions that have always lived under change and transformation work. The difference is that the pace of technology has run far ahead of the maturity of the institutional and societal response. We measure the wrong things, as we usually do. We measure adoption rates, prompts per user, time saved per task, and percentage of workflows automated. These are the easy measures. They are not the measures that will tell us whether the agent era is actually working. The measures that matter, and that almost no one is publishing, are the rate at which agents or model outputs require correction, the time spent on correction relative to the time saved by the automation, the rate at which agent-driven actions produce customer impact that requires recovery. The change in employee judgment and capability over time as agents handle more of the routine work and the change in how quickly the organization learns. We measure activity with precision. We measure consequences and capability with almost nothing at all. If you're responsible for an agent deployment in your organization, that's the measurement gap I want you to look at this week. What are you measuring? What are you not measuring? What would you have to change about your reporting before you could honestly say whether your deployment is working for your people and your customers, not just for your dashboards? There's one more dimension I want to name because it has received almost no serious treatment in the agent era conversation, simply to my knowledge. As agents take on more of the routine work, the pathways by which humans develop judgment in their fields begins to change. Junior practitioners in marketing, sales, support, finance, and operations have historically built their professional instincts by doing the routine work, making small mistakes, receiving feedback, and gradually internalizing the patterns that distinguish good work from average work. If agents now perform that routine work, the apprenticeship that produced the next generation of seasoned practitioners is interrupted. Organizations that don't redesign their development paths around this shift are going to discover, maybe 5 years from now, that they have a layer of senior managers a layer of agents, and very little capability in between. That is a foreseeable consequence. Addressing it, well, is a leadership decision, not a technology decision. The organizations that take it seriously now will have professional capacity in the next decade. The ones that don't will be in trouble in ways that will take them years to be able to recognize. I want to give the counter argument a fair hearing here because the discipline of the show is to take the other side seriously. The counter argument is that organizations that wait will be left behind, that AI adoption follows an experience curve, that the only way to learn is to do, that hesitation itself is a form of risk. All of that is true to some degree. The 2,000 plus apps in the HubSpot ecosystem and the IDC sized opportunity, well, they're not imaginary. The cost of being late to a significant shift in infrastructure is very real. I would be way careless to dismiss the potential and really the strong call to action for adoption. But the choice we actually face is not between aggressive adoption and standing still. The choice is between aggressive adoption with shallow readiness and deliberate adoption with deeper readiness. The first looks faster in the first quarter, and given our default towards short term thinking, many are attempting to adapt and adopt quickly. The second, well, it looks faster across the first 3 years because it doesn't spend most of that period recovering from the consequences of the first. It spends most of that period learning, adapting, and finding the appropriate applications of the technology. The research on innovation, change, and transformation tells us this consistently. The pattern here is not new. The technology is. Here is the closing reframe I want to offer you today. And it is the question I'm sitting with in my own work, and I invite you to sit with it in yours. We have spent the last several years asking whether AI is ready for us. That is the wrong question, or at least it is only half of the question. The other half, the one that determines whether the agent era produces value or just activity, is whether we are ready for AI. Are our organizations structured to absorb a class of tools that act, not just tools that suggest? Are our leaders prepared to redefine accountability around outputs they did not directly produce? Are our measurement systems honest enough to surface the cost of correction alongside the benefit of automation? Are our people invested in deeply enough that their judgment continues to develop rather than fade as agents take more of the routine work? Are we, as practitioners, willing to slow down enough to do the boring, expensive, unglamorous work of building the trust foundations that make autonomy safe? The technology is going to keep moving. The vendors are going to keep announcing. The readiness illusion will keep tempting us to confuse the announcement with the arrival. The work, as it almost always is, will be to stay inside the difficulty, to refuse the easy story, and to build the human capacity that any serious technology eventually demands of the people, the very humans who use it. The agent era is real. We aren't ready for it yet. Both of those statements can be true at the same time. Holding them both is the beginning of doing the work well. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe to the Human Factor podcast wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. Leave a rating and a comment and share this episode with your leadership team. Subscribe to the Ideas and Innovations newsletter at 2040digital.com for weekly frameworks and research on why change succeeds or fails. The companion piece for this episode is in the newsletter directory on 2040digital.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn, where I post regularly about the psychology of transformation. Until then, remember, transformation doesn't fail because of technology, strategy, or market conditions. It fails because of people. And the more deeply you understand the human factor, the more likely your transformation is to succeed. I'm Kevin Novak. Thanks for watching or listening.